So Zach Polanski is a leadership contender for the Green Party of England and Wales, which, if you remember, you can vote up until the end of the month. So make sure you get your votes in to back Zach for leader of the Green Party. And he was on the Jeremy Vine show yesterday debating Anne Widdecombe, who, again, for some reason seems to never want to leave politics. You think she's gone, and she just reappears like a crypt keeper to say some crazy stuff. And this stuff we're going to watch is quite crazy. She genuinely says some really, really crazy stuff here. So I'm looking forward to that. This is about the benefits bill and whether or not that there is too many people are claiming. Are there people who are claiming fraudulently? Let's see what evidence both of these two are going to bring to the debate. That's foreshadowing for later.
Give us a call, because here is a question. Are too many people claiming benefits? The number is 027 862 2222. That's the number you need. Let us know your thoughts, because new figures show that a record 8 million people are on universal credit. That's the highest since the benefit was introduced more than a decade ago. The steep rise has been driven almost entirely by people who are not required to work. 3.7 million people make up this group. Now, these people could be off work because of long-term sickness, because they might be over the pension age, they might be having a baby, or they might have a baby under one, because they're considered to have no prospect of work. There's been a rise among older and prime age workers, with over 55 seeing the biggest jump in being signed off without having to look for work. And the government previously said it inherited a broken welfare system. So here's a question. Do we need to make it harder to claim universal credit? I'm going to go to you, Anne, but I think people at home need to know exactly what universal credit is and how much.
I think it's worth pointing out as well that when it comes to incapacity, which, as far as I'm aware, is a large percentage of the people who are over the age of 55 who are claiming, it's really interesting how we continually focus on the under 22's NEETs, right? The not in education, employment or training, when the biggest growth we're seeing in people claiming, especially incapacity, is coming from the over 55s, which makes sense. Lots of these people have been working for quite a long time. Lots of these people have been doing jobs, especially in the trades, which are pretty strenuous, and you can do your back in pretty easily. It also doesn't help when 40% of people claiming incapacity are on an NHS waiting list. So there's a real problem in terms of the fact that we, for a very long time, didn't look after people to ensure that they could work for a long time. And it doesn't help when we've had the biggest drop in NHS funding as a percentage of GDP ever sustained between 2010 and 2019, which then got blown apart by the pandemic, which has led a bunch of people to not get the treatment they need to get them back working. Again, we were told there was no need to fix the roof while the sun was shining, and now it's pissing down with rain, we've got a leaky roof. Whereas we could have fixed all this stuff by having a well-funded NHS during the austerity years, and a bunch of people who would otherwise have not been signed off for work would be able to work because they wouldn't be sitting on an NHS waiting list.
The basic level of universal credit is £400 and 14p a month. That's for a single person aged 25 and over. Should we stop that credit? I mean, I wonder, it's always a question that's asked of spokespeople and politicians whether you could live on that.
Indeed, it is a question that is asked. But I think what I want to look at is this, and I think it's important. Yes, 8 million is too many, but you've got to ask, why is it happening? And I think there is a mix. I think undeniably, Labour's policy on the employer's national insurance has hit the jobs market. People aren't in work, or they're not in full-time work.
But the increase in these numbers is from people who aren't working because they can't work, not people who can work but have been made redundant, who are unemployed. The overall levels of unemployment, i.e. the 4.6% number that you hear, which has increased very slightly, but it's still low in historical terms. We've usually had unemployment around about 6 or 7% in this country, so it being between 4 and 5% is still pretty good as far as unemployment levels go. That specifically tracks people who are out of work, who are looking for work. And whilst there's been a small increase in these people, You can't blame our lack of employers hiring for the big spike we've seen in incapacity, for example.
Or whatever it may be. But also, for years now, it's nothing to do with just Labour, for years now, the awarding of what we would call invalidity benefit, that is credit because you cannot work because you're ill or
We say
you're
it's
disabled.
people not required to work. That's the
Yeah,
language now.
that's
That's the
right.
largest number of claimants.
Yeah, exactly. We have not been fastidious for a very long time now about assessing and then reassessing. And we simply haven't done that. And a lot of people, and this is well known, people talk about it.
I mean, this just isn't true. People who go through the assessments for things like incapacity, there's a very large amount that you have to go through to be able to claim this. There's this continual colloquial idea that there's this huge cohort of welfare claimants who are just scamming the system because they've told some cock and bull story to the people who are doing their assessment, whether it be for PIP or whether it be for limited capability for work-related activity, incapacity, or whatever it is. These things have really stringent requirements to be able to actually be accepted. So the idea that there's somehow this mythical cohort of people who managed to cheat the system is provided with zero evidence.
A lot of people are claiming who actually could work.
Right. Zach?
The audacity of a former Conservative minister to be saying that actually the problem here is people with disabilities, for people with long-term health sicknesses. We have just had a pandemic. The amount of long COVID going around where people are physically not able to work. If people could work, they want to work. Poverty is not a lack of character, it is a lack of money. And when we've had rising living standards, mass inequality, inequality is at the heart of all of our problems. Rather than tackle the inequality, Anne's suggestion here is no, let's punch down, let's tackle some of the most vulnerable yet resilient people in our society. Rather than saying, could multimillionaires and billionaires pay a little bit more?
Well, how are the Greens going to handle this? Because, you know,
That is a very good point that Zach is making there. Very, very good point that Zach is making there. There has been a mass disabling event in the form of the coronavirus pandemic. People will look at the disparity between the level to which people claim these things in the UK versus on the continent. And then, of course, there's two big reasons for this. In that, on the continent, they had healthcare sectors that weren't deliberately defunded by their own governments for a decade. And also on the continent, they had a pandemic response that wasn't run by a fucking clown, which helps. Right, these two things help when you have healthcare systems that work and political leaders that don't say, let the bodies pile high. 40% of people who are on incapacity on an NHS waiting list.
ultimately, this comes out of the public purse.
Yes.
We're talking about an increase in 3.7 million people who are, I'm going to use language that Anne didn't use, but nevertheless implied, who are so-called on the sick, when a number of them, Anne makes the point, you know, could perfectly easily go to work if they could find a job.
Well, I think there's no evidence for this other than in kind of right-wing rags. But when you actually look at the data, I think it's very clear, actually, that people want to work and that a lot of people who are claiming universal credit are in work, but actually work isn't paying enough. In terms of how I tackle it, I guess there's a long-term solution and a quick solution.
Yep.
Long-term solution is a universal basic income. So actually to say everyone in this country should have a safety net so that they don't have to worry about a roof above their head, food on the table, basic survival should be covered by the state.
Taxing millionaires and billionaires to do that.
I think that's part of it. I think there's also things like we are at the moment, we loaned money to private banks during COVID. We're now paying interest on that money. There's absolutely no reason to do that. That would be £15 billion straight back into the system.
That's a long term. So what's a short term solution?
I think the short-term solution is to recognise that actually there are systemic issues here around the National Health Service, and that if people are getting sick, it's because we have a sick population. And actually we should be investing in mental health. We should be investing in making sure that people know they can make the best decisions for them and their health.
Well, I just pause saying we all come.
And these are all very, very true. These are all very, very true. The reality is that, again, Rinder puts it to Zach that with a bunch of people who can work, who don't work, who are claiming benefits that say they've been written off. And I'm like, well, the problem here, again, is the lack of application from the state in putting money into resources to help these people. We've seen, remember that documentary we watched from Channel 4, which had Matey Boy, what's his name? Fraser Nelson, the guy with the weird voice, who said that all the people he spoke to, they wanted to be back into work, but there was a bunch of systemic problems getting in the way, such as if they were still too disabled and they couldn't actually get to the position of being able to work, but they went off benefits into work, they have to go back through the review process again. Luckily, that's going away with the new bill that's coming through. I don't know how actionable that's going to be. I don't know how much utility that's going to hold. But again, this idea, again, that there's huge stock of people, this huge cohort of people who's just sitting on their asses doing nothing all day, it's a real invention. It really is. Because people look at the unemployment number. You look at 4.6% unemployment. You say it's been above 4% for like over a year now. People will look at that 4% and assume that that 4% is the same people, when that's not true. The number of people who are employed or unemployed, that's always in flux. It levels off at a certain kind of average, which is why it only goes up and down slowly. But the people who are coming in and out of employment, who are part of that figure, or in terms of labour force participation, that's constantly changing, constantly in flux. Do I think the universal basic income is the immediate thing that we should be doing? I mean, it's going to be difficult to be able to find the funds to be able to do that without it being inflationary. But on a basic level, I mean, the point that he makes about funding the NHS is the important bit. People are sick, make them well. That involves, again, not having a government that underfunds the NHS for a decade, of which Anne Widdecombe was a part of that.
Back to you to respond to that, Anne, but I'm going to go to Pat. You're in I think in Denbighshire. Forgive me, Pat. Help me out here. You've got Anne saying, look, this is unsustainable. Look at the number of people who are so-called on the sick. A number of them could go to work. They're just shirking getting a job. And frankly, the people who are working and doing the right thing shouldn't be penalised and paying tax for those people. What do you make of that? Or do you agree with Zach?
Anne is absolutely 100% correct. For example, I'm 79, going on 80.
Right.
I have a terminal lung disease.
I'm sorry to hear that.
4 stents in my heart. I've applied, I got a blue badge.
Right.
I've applied 3 times for attendance allowance.
Yeah.
And I've been refused because I was totally honest and said I can go to the toilet on my own during the day.
Right.
3 times I've been refused. Right. The next one, my son, 57, worked all his life. Had a massive heart attack last year.
I'm sorry, Pat.
He has a disability with his knee,
right.
And he is not even getting enough benefits to pay his rent.
Pat, I'm sorry to cut you short.
I know, just 1 minute. No, just 1 minute.
Yeah,
there are people that I personally know are claiming for everything, and
well, if Pat knows them, that's the same as evidence, isn't it? If Pat knows some people, that's the same as evidence. I met a guy one time and he told me a mate of his cousin was on benefits and they were benefits they shouldn't be getting. Well done. That's the same as evidence, isn't it?
They don't need to.
So, Pat, you are expressing, I have to say, Zach, what a lot of people are saying, which is, look, if you're an honest person, right, if you tell the truth, you don't really get anywhere. But there are a number of people who are frankly fiddling the system, which is why there's such a rise in people that are claiming universal credit when you really should be encouraging them out to work. You know, Pat is by no stretch of the imagination alone in her view about that. We'll come back to it. Emily, you're in Essex. Do you agree with that?
Hello. I just wanted to make a point that the universal credit has. I was on ESA, and ESA is now stopping, and it's all moved over to universal credit.
Yeah.
I'd like to know the number that they think has gone up, because all of that has been put on universal credit.
Right, so that's employment and support allowance. So it's gone up massively. So just to be clear, the steepest rise, and I want to repeat this, is a rise of 39% or 1 million since the same time period in 2024. That's the people, according to the Independent and the Standard, who are now claiming universal credit. Thanks for calling. Yeah.
No, sorry. Is that because they are no longer on ESA? I wonder how much millions that was.
Well, the answer to that question is some are, but the biggest group, it's...
No, but the group that they're a part of, Robbie, the group that they're a part of doesn't matter as to whether a new claimant or a migrated claimant. The cohort is increasing on universal credit for all sorts of reasons, right? But what we want to know is how you differentiate between an increase in claims because they are people who are claiming for the first time, or because they're people who've been migrated over from legacy benefits. Quite literally a judge. You should know this. You should know how to differentiate between these things.
Seems, and this is the conversation we're having, is that even if you're entitled to that employment support allowance, is the extent to which those people actually need that benefit, or there is a real conversation taking place where those people who in many cases have health issues should be encouraged back into work, Emily?
Those people, I am with Mind, and we do so much for the nature and getting out and helping one another.
Right.
So, but yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Now, Zach, before I come back to Anne, you know, you've called for better support of getting people back into work.
Yeah, absolutely. And a huge issue here as well is underclaiming. I think that's actually the real conversation to have here, is the amount of people who could be claiming benefits, but actually because they don't have access to the right information or their lives are too chaotic that even just to go through the same system, they can't even get that money. How deeply performatively cruel do we have to be to people who are disabled? The previous caller, I think, was making my point, actually, that people are struggling so much with long-term health conditions and disabled people who actually want to work, who want that support, but actually they can't get that support by magic. They need basic money, you know, to cover things like, you know, if they can't even dress themselves, to possibly have someone to be able to support them, to then even think about getting to work later. But the solution here cannot be to cut money away from people. And in terms of fraud, the data shows over and over again that the cases of people not legitimately claiming are so minor, compared to, by the way, government ministers, when we look at PPE contracts that have still not been tried and
very quickly in response.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that some people need it. That's why we've got...
And that's the thing, is that when it comes to levels of fraud in terms of spending on benefits, Zach is right. The figure is 0.02%, by the way. But that's for PIP. That's for PIP claims, broadly are done for a fraudulent manner. Most universal credit fraud that's being done is by working over the limit to not be able to claim and then still getting it. That's the majority of fraud that comes to universal credit. What we're talking about here when it comes to the limited capability for work-related activity, that has a very, very stringent test to be able to claim it, which has very low fraud rates as well. So that's the point that should be made here. 'Cause obviously, PIP and the LCRRA payment are different things. Universal credit is a different thing. There is some level of fraud in terms of people who are working and not declaring it and then claiming universal credit on top, claiming they're unemployed when they're not. But that doesn't apply to people who are claiming universal credit and then getting the extra payment because they are unable to work because they're signed off sick. And the vast majority of these people go to speak to medical professionals. I don't know about Anne Widdecombe. I don't know what medical qualifications that she has to decide whether someone's fit for work or not. I'm sure she'll tell us, though.
The benefit. But equally, there is no doubt that there is a growing number of people who don't actually need it.
Where's your evidence?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly where I get that evidence from in a minute, if you'll just let me finish.
Please.
So there is a growing number of people who are either working and claiming, or who are claiming when they don't really need it.
Well, he asked where the evidence is from.
And the evidence from that, the evidence for that, rather, is the number of cases that most people can point to that they know, where it's...
Okay, chat. Her evidence is people know some guys down the road and they think they know what their situation is. First of all, let's just lump the idea, who in the fuck is interrogating their next door neighbours about their disability and their dealings with the DWP? Who is going down their streets with a clipboard, interrogating people they know from down the corner who they think are fraudulently claiming benefits, that is going to provide a body of evidence to be able to make a qualitative assessment over whether or not there is a problem with benefit fraud. Who the fuck is doing this? And second of all, anecdotes are not data. I know a guy is not data. That is not how you do qualitative analysis. Literally, the evidence is it was revealed to me in a dream. She was previously a government minister. A government minister, and her evidence is, I know a guy and he said a thing.
Happening.
Anecdotes isn't evidence.
No, it's not just anecdotal, it's people actually knowing where this is going. I've been a social security.
Not data.
I've been a social security minister, and we relied heavily on what people told us, because that
and that's why we're in such a mess. If you as a minister were not looking at data, but your mates
actually told us more than the raw data.
This is
literally. She says that when she was social security minister, she relied on people telling us some stories instead of empirical data. And you know why? You know why she says this? Specifically because the base assumption that she has is that this cohort of fraudsters must exist. That is taken as read. She's not questioning this cohort exists. It is, how do you find them? And because the data didn't show it, probably because they don't exist, but she's convinced that they do, she has to go on literally any evidence that she can find to back up her priors, which is, some guy told me that they exist one time, and that's all the evidence that I need. Government minister chat. Previous government minister, a social security minister, going off of hearsay to make official government decisions. Zach's right. No wonder this country is in a mess. We have unqualified idiots, quite frankly, morons who don't understand basic data analysis, making decisions that affect millions of people.
It's quite extraordinary. So you're saying you made government policy based on what people told you as opposed to the evidence of what was
if it's going on, yes,
That's
absolutely.
astounding.
Well,
Really?
either way,
Well, you may be astounding.
we find out more what the Green Party's platform is. You heard it here. I'm not sure. First, it might be your first chance to have listened to what the Green Party has to say. Universal basic income for everybody. Where that money's going to come from, you'll have to listen into their party conference in October in Bournemouth. But later, it's a paper.
I mean, we are going to be coming to their future tax plans after this video, because we've got another video to watch of Widdecombe and Polanski. For people who weren't quite done with watching a geriatric old woman bleat nonsensical things into her lapel microphone, there's more where that came from. Interestingly, again, how we're going to pay for it. I mean, obviously you increase taxes. But this reminds me of that video we watched of that Tory baroness debating Curtis Daly, friend of the show, from Turn Left, that you should go and subscribe to. And at the end of the debate, when Curtis provided loads of data from other countries, from similar economies, from other kinds of welfare states that had different models to us that performed better, that were less punitive, when I was one of the most punitive welfare states in Europe, quite frankly. This was an FT study that showed that for 12 out of the last 14 years, welfare didn't cover the basic necessities, which shows you just how punitive our welfare system is, one of the most punitive in Europe. And after Curtis provided all this data, the Tory baroness, a legislator for fucking life, literally said, well, the difference between you and me is that you look at data and I have experience or some shit. And I'm just like, that's the issue. That is the gerontocracy manifest. The gerontocracy in this country literally think that because they are older than everybody else, they just have more experience, and that means they don't have to look at the data that our younger people are providing to them. Again, this is specific to the older people who are the politicians. I'm not saying this is the entirety of the old generations, right? Obviously not. But when it comes to the gerontocracy politically, that's how they view this stuff. And this is why our country is in the shit. Because people who actually know how to interpret data aren't making the rules. That's a really good point, Arok. It's just like Farage's stuff that he was doing on TV the other day about how crime is at record highs when actually it's at record lows. Like, don't get me wrong, I think Farage had a point in which the social realm has deteriorated, right? I don't think anyone would disagree with the deterioration of the social realm insofar as antisocial behaviour is a problem, but that will get fixed by state expenditure, by rebuilding the social realm, by rebuilding our social infrastructure, by making people feel that there was such a thing as society again, and they weren't just individuals interacting with their own personal, rational self-interest at the forefront of their minds, right? Which is the opposite of what Farage wants. Farage wants even more of the things that created the societal breakdown. He wants more neoliberalism, more austerity, more cuts to the social infrastructure. A society that doesn't exist. He's a Thatcherite through and through. He does not believe in society. He believes in this kind of anarcho-capitalist idea of everyone acting in their own rational self-interest and not caring about other people. If you've taught people from birth that that's the case, then why wouldn't they play music out loud when it would irritate other people? Because these people don't matter, because that's not in your rational self-interest, is it? So, moving on from the last point that was made by Zach in the previous debate that we just watched there, around the plans that the Green Party have long-term to try and institute some form of universal basic income. And the idea that we need to increase taxes to be able to do so. There's a discussion also between Widdecombe and Polanski around the issue of inheritance tax, as the Labour Party are thinking about rejigging the rules on inheritance tax to be able to raise money for the Exchequer to fulfil a £41 billion black hole by the end of 2029, right? So there is going to be a large black hole in 4 years' time. It's been kind of misreported, so it's worth making that clear. But taxes do need to go up. That's true. And Rachel Reeves is looking at inheritance tax, and this was debated between Polanski and Widdecombe. Let's have a look at what they had to say.
It's being reported that the Treasury is looking to raise more money from inheritance tax. This comes as pressure on the country's finances grows ahead of the autumn budget, with a gap between revenue and spending estimated to reach more than £40 billion. Now, sources say that the government is considering the possibility of a cap on lifetime gifting. So how it works at the moment is that gifts made 7 years before someone dies are not subject to inheritance tax. So if introduced, the cap would limit the amount of money or value of assets someone could donate as part of their inheritance planning. Now, no decisions have been made yet, but how it works is if you don't want the tax man to get what you're going to give to your kids, get their hands on it, you can say, look, kids or people you love, here it is. As if I live 7 years, then the government have no right to it. Anne, is this yet another raid on people who've worked hard all of their lives?
Yes, it is. And when you consider particularly...
Well, first of all, let's not frame it this way, because that's ridiculous. Because you can't tax people for all the work they've done throughout their life, because they're dead. If they've died, you can't tax them, can you? You're not taxing dead people, you're taxing the people who are going to be inheriting that money, who are going to be inheriting those assets. How much work have they done to generate the value of those assets? Fuck all. Nothing. Not a sausage. If you're dead, you cannot be taxed. Your kids can be taxed, and damn sight well they should be. Because they didn't do anything to earn it, did it? It's always the meritocrats, isn't it? It's always the people who bleat about the importance of meritocracy, who balk at the idea of the kids of incredibly rich people being taxed so they don't receive millions of pounds for free, and who also balk at the idea of those posh kids who've again done nothing at all other than win the uterus lottery to be able to be born to rich parents. Maybe having to have their education be slightly more expensive by increased VAT on private schools. That thing that they do to give them a leg up above everybody else. Because the outcomes for private school kids are way ahead of state school kids. And that is a balance that needs to be redressed. Again, because for everyone who's a meritocrat, you should believe in equality of opportunity. That is the basis of meritocracy, for what the meritocrats believe in. And I firmly believe in equality of opportunity. And there is not equality of opportunity if, as the child of rich parents, you get to just inherit millions of pounds for nothing, having done literally nothing. You could literally do nothing and also have better education as well. That shit needs to be stopped.
The value of houses. You know, people can have bought quite a modest house, often with quite a bit of struggle. And then, of course, the house goes up and up and up in value, and the Treasury says, "Oh, thank you. We'll have a large proportion." And what I hate about this is, that people are taxed when they earn money. They're taxed on the interest if they then save part of it. And now, if they want to give it away to their children and help their children, they're going to be taxed on that as well.
Yeah, sure, cool, good, like that. Money is taxed in basically every transaction. What she's gearing up to here is you're taxing money that's already been taxed, which is a nonsense phrase. That phrase is meaningless. All money has previously been taxed on every transaction, right? Or you get taxed on your income. Well, that was taxed when it was given to a company in VAT when a product was bought. That is after corporation tax. That's after a payroll tax. Every single money gets taxed at every transaction. There is no such thing as quote-unquote double taxation, i.e. money being taxed after it's already been taxed, because that happens at every single stage in which money is transferred. So it's a nonsense idea. And second of all, just because you bought a house when it was cheap, your kids will therefore be buying or inheriting, therefore your kids will be inheriting a incredibly expensive asset. It doesn't matter what it was worth in the 1990s, it's what it's worth now in 2025. It was relevant. I say this as somebody who's in that very specific position. My parents bought a pretty modest house, pretty reasonable house to buy, just 3 bedrooms, right? In the 1990s. That skyrocketed in value, and I will be paying inheritance tax on it, and I'm happy to pay it. I did nothing. You know what? My parents did nothing to make this house worth what it was. That was George Osborne's fault and Gordon Brown's fault. Why this house is worth a lot of money. And when I do inherit it, I will gladly pay inheritance tax because it is money that I have not worked for. I have done literally nothing to earn the value of the house that I will eventually inherit, which will be worth eye-watering amounts, one would assume, when my parents sadly pass away. The house is literally worth a huge amount of money by neither mine nor my parents doing. Literally. I'm in favour of much more punitive inheritance taxes. And I will go on record as saying inheritance tax is the most moral tax. There is no tax in existence that is more moral than inheritance tax. So all it does is level the playing field for the children of a generation based upon the uterus lottery, which children do not choose. It's as simple as that.
Well, no, I think this is wholly wrong.
The thing is, Zach, we're not talking about billionaires, right? Or in many cases, millionaires. It's the one asset that a family has. Often they live in working class areas of London, may have.
It's the top 4% of estates. It's the top 4% of estates. It's not poor people by any stretch of the imagination.
Bought their house and they find that they've got a value of an asset, that's worth substantial value. Why should they not be able to pass that on to their kids?
Because it's the principle of it. We need to tax wealth and not work. We tax far too often earned income more than we tax unearned wealth. So if Anne is outraged for people's children, we should be outraged that actually children are growing up in such an unequal society where we're struggling to fund public services and people are worried about their futures, and actually moving money out of assets and getting into the general stream is actually a really positive and important thing to do.
It really isn't only the middle classes and the wealthy who use public services. Sorry, it isn't only the poor who use public services.
Well, you're making my point for me.
We all use public services, so it isn't unequal at all.
I mean, it is unequal in terms of the level of wealth that poor people have. The areas that they live in are poorer. They have worse funded councils, worse funded public services. Those are better in the richer areas. There is a regional inequality as well as a class inequality going on here. And Zach is absolutely right. Assets are empty money. That is money just sitting there doing nothing. If that was sold, if that was liquidated and put into the hands of consumers, that would be better for the economy. That would drive demand. That would make supply meet the demand and grow the economy. Zach's making a really salient point here about the nature of the velocity of money, which goes down if it just gets poured into asset bubbles. And yeah, the middle class and the rich use public services. They should contribute to them so they get something back, and so that they feel like it's worth doing so because the public services are well funded and are worth using. The worst situation is where you defund public services so much they become so unusable that middle and upper class people are better off using the private sector. Then they don't feel like they should contribute, and therefore you get this class conflict between middle and working class people when they should be class allies against the ruling class, against the bourgeois, against the elite, right?
And the idea that you penalise people several times on the same money is just wrong.
But we hear over and over again about public services that Keir Starmer needs to make tricky decisions. But why are these never tricky decisions for multimillionaires or billionaires, or indeed people with assets? Why are these always tricky decisions for the poorest people, for people on benefits, for disabled people?
The reason that Keir Starmer is having to make tricky decisions is very straightforward. He's made people worse off. And he's now faced with a choice of making them even worse off than that, or somehow.
I mean, the study showing that they need to find a £40 billion by 28-29 to fill the black hole specifically says that the living standards of the top, middle and upper class earners is going to increase. So they've not made people worse off. The sector of society that's going to get worse under that same report that we're using to justify these tax rises, or the necessity of these tax rises, is showing that the poorest people are going to be worse off, even though wages are outpacing inflation. The problem, of course, is inequality. Is that you can have poorer people earning more, which they will be. Wages are going to be outpacing inflation. We have seen this over time. If they don't have the right social services or the right social infrastructure necessary to be able to draw upon to increase their quality of living, and if the majority of that money is going in rent to a middle-class boomer private landlord. If the prices of commodities are too high, but it's not put into inflation because it's only the ones that affect the poorest, the Vimes Boots Index, you know? It's just nonsense what she's saying. She's just living in fantasy land.
Trying to stimulate growth, which he's cut off by the national insurance rise.
You don't stimulate growth by keeping money in assets. You stimulate growth by moving money around the economy. You stimulate
growth by letting people keep their own money and spend it.
That's the
At
thing.
the moment, people.
Well, no, because they're not spending their money. They're keeping it tied up in asset values, Anne. Again, you're making Zach's arguments for him. And again, what she's saying here is another form of the argument that, well, private spending is always better at growing the economy than public spending, which is neoliberal groupthink and has no data behind it. No data behind it at all. Because we have a growth problem in this country because we haven't funded things like the NHS enough, so people are too sick, which is the whole point of the conversation we were having in the last segment, where they were talking about all the people who were sick off work. Yeah, if you'd spent money on the NHS, public expenditure, we would have a growing economy because more people would be working because they wouldn't be off sick, which was your doing as a Tory minister.
You know, I wonder about that, Zach. You know, it's not just a Thatcherite sort of view, but the problem, as she said, is that sometimes when the government is in power, especially a left-wing government, they never get tired of spending other people's money. And this is a worry that people have.
It's a fiat currency. It's all government money. All money is government money. There is no such thing as taxpayers' money. It's all public money.
Have at home, you know, it's one thing to say millionaires, multimillionaires and billionaires should pay their fair dues, but these are sort of ordinary people. One of the points that a lot of our viewers make is, look, you've got to keep people that generate the wealth in the country.
Yeah, exactly.
More of this and they're going to head off, and all of the things that you care about simply won't be paid for because it's an open global market and they can go elsewhere.
Well, like
Two things to debunk what Mr. Rinder is saying here. First of all, it is the top 4% of estates that pay inheritance tax. It's the top 4% of estates. It is the wealthiest. It is 100% the wealthiest who pay inheritance tax. Trying to imply that people on the bottom are going to be hit by it is nonsense. It is abject nonsense. It is nonsense. It is completely untrue. Second of all, super interesting. We're going to talk about the idea people might leave the country because this news came out today. There is no millionaire exodus as a result of Labour's policy, study finds. Millionaire migration rates have stood at near 0% for the last decade, including 2024. Fears of a millionaire exodus following Labour's general election win last summer were completely unfounded. Plenty of reports and stories predicted there would be a mass exodus of the wealthy. That's like the one that we debunked on stream, including the Henley Partners one, which showed via looking at people's LinkedIn profiles there was a bigger millionaire exodus. Turns out, looking at people's LinkedIn profiles, bunch of bollocks. Total bollocks, not true, and now we have actual studies and data showing that this is completely untrue and that millionaires haven't left the country. So, again, Robbie Rinder here just talking a load of bollocks.
So many issues. Thatcher was talking absolute nonsense because it's not other people's money, it's Bank of England money, and actually anything we can do, we can afford. And we know that investing in our public services creates something called spending multipliers. For every pound we spend, that is creating more money that's going around our economy. The way to destroy the economy is exactly what we're talking about here, which is to store money in assets, making the inequality gap even wider. Poor people getting poorer, rich people getting richer, and problems within society, our social structures are completely falling
why
down.
would people? Why are people leaving the country? Big entrepreneurs, etc. You want to bring that wealth of ideas.
I don't believe they are leaving the country, and actually they can't move their assets. And we're talking right here about assets. Assets don't move. The Duke of Westminster owns half of Mayfair. He's not going to just move Mayfair.
Anne?
Yeah, well, I was.
He got everything. I wish I could comment on this because I'm supposed to be a commentary channel, but he just knocked it out the park. Keynesian multiplier. He's been watching my stream, hasn't he? Watching my stream. Because I talk about the Keynesian multiplier all the time, right? In terms of the money should be in the hands of the people with the highest propensity for consumption to be able to purchase new commodities to then stimulate the supply side to meet that new demand. This was how our economy works in terms of the kind of Butskillist economic framework in the entire post-war period, and that was the golden age of capitalism. There wasn't an asset bubble. We didn't have a rentier economy. We had a productive economy, and it incentivized more production if people had more money to spend. He's right. We need to get money out of assets and circling around the economy.
Actually going to make a point earlier, so
Yep.
we've slightly gone off it. Just to say this to you, when people cannot spend, they cannot buy goods and services. The people who provide those goods and services have to cut back. That means unemployment. That means even more people depending on the public purse. What you want is people to have more of their own money, indeed as much of their own money as it is possible to do. And that then creates spending through the economy. Now, any student of economics will tell you.
But that doesn't matter whether it's public or private spending. If you're engaging in austerity, which is what she's arguing against here, i.e. the amount of money circling in the economy is lower, because you're taxing more than you're spending. You're engaging in a budget surplus. That's what she thinks is bad here, and I would agree with her. But what she's trying to imply that money that's being spent by the state is less than money being spent by private individuals, which isn't true. That's just not true. Just because the state is spending the money rather than regular people spending that money, that's still money in the economy. That's still money being spent. She's not talking in any kind of sense. And even then, we're talking about money that is currently tied up in assets that would need to be liquidated to pay for the inheritance tax. Like, she is arguing against a tax which frees up money, a liquid money in the economy, spent on commodities to grow the economy. She literally is talking out of her arse, and then trying to lecture Zach on, well, what basic economics is. Bitch, you know nothing.
That if people can't spend, you actually start to damage the economy.
Very quick about assets. If they're hoarding in assets, they're not spending it.
Well, very quick one. Zach, let's just talk very quickly before we move on to a story I think you've got about the water companies. I'm wondering about the politics of this. For Labour to win, as they did at the last election, albeit with a low national share, a lot of it antipathy towards the Tory government, to say the least, and your party, the Green Party, did very well. Here's a question that I think a lot of people have. What about the politics of this, where this is likely to affect the biggest group of voters, middle-class people, who simply found themselves, as Anne was describing before, owning an asset through hard work and saving and diligence, and kind of want to keep it?
I think this is what's missing in politics, which is essentially the importance of storytelling and not going just where people are of the easy answers, but actually politicians spending their time talking about why these decisions need to be made and why these things are important. And as I said at the very beginning, we often hear about this so-called burden on working people. And it is true that some people who are working really, really hard, talking about nurses, cleaners, caterers, people who are working every single day with their hands and with their brains, are being taxed more than someone who might have done nothing but just happens to own an asset. That is
a Green Party view.
That is Rishi Sunak he's describing there, by the way. Rishi Sunak, in 2023, or 22-23, paid a lower overall tax rate than a nurse. Because he owns shit, and he doesn't do any actual work. Because I don't think his prime ministership could be classified as work, really, let's be real. He made more money and paid less tax as a multi-millionaire because he owned shit rather than did any actual work. And at the same time, forced nurses to go on strike because he refused to negotiate with them over pay. What a monster.
That, as far as you're concerned, this big group of middle-class people that might have a house, not just middle-class people, some of them are nurses, all the people you described, that, as far as you're concerned, if you've got that money, that value in an asset, you shouldn't be able to pass it on to your children.
Again, I think it'd be difficult to justify 100% inheritance tax. I could be convinced to support it. Abby Wilkinson's got a really great article from a few years ago in The Guardian justifying an 100% inheritance tax. And I can certainly believe there'd be a moral position on why an 100% inheritance tax would be a utilitarian proposition. I just think it's unworkable. You're going to make the best of what you've got in terms of what you can actually get through in policy. Higher inheritance tax, absolutely %, you know? But again, he's lying. He's lying to you and telling you that it's middle-class people who'll be here, when 96% of estates do not pay inheritance tax. It is the top 4% of asset holders. When they pass it on, those estates get taxed. Only the top 4%. So he's just lying again. He just doesn't have any facts to back up his position.
Should go into the public pot and be used for public services.
Well, that's a question about taxation reform.
No, it's a direct, but it's a direct question.
No, and I
about
largely agree, but things like bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax, right now, a whole kind of tax system is weighed unfairly so that it's hitting poorer people hardest. What I'm really suggesting is that those with the broadest shoulders need to carry the biggest
You've got to give it to him, Anne. That is an ideological point of view. It's a very clear, you might say, red water between the Green Party, who are the party of the left now, and the Labour Party.
And if you look at countries who have practiced communism, which is pretty well all what that is,
Excuse me, hang on a minute. Well, high capital gains tax and larger inheritance taxes is communism now, is it? Well, I will look forward to visiting the Communist Republic of Norway at some time in the future, which of course doesn't exist, but they do both of those things. Like, again, just this is what happens whenever you propose anything like mildly social democratic. Again, we used to have the top rate of tax being 90% in this country. Was it communist then? Were we the communist kingdom of the UK in 1960? I don't think we were. I could spend more time ripping into this, but I think if you're watching my channel, you know that this is dumb.
If you look at countries which have practiced trying to level, not opportunity, but trying to level actual holding of wealth.
Well, you are not talking about equality of opportunity. You want there to not be equality of opportunity, Anne, because you think that disgusting and cosseted offspring born to rich bellends should not have to work. You are arguing that there should be zero merits required from the kids of rich people to be able to live in the lap of luxury for eternity. That's your argument, Anne.
They haven't really done so well.
Well, I think that's untrue. If you look at somewhere like Switzerland, that has a wealth tax, and actually they seem to be doing pretty well. There's lots of other countries around the world that have looked at wealth taxes. And fundamentally, I think most people agree that when people are really, really struggling, those with inordinate amounts of wealth, I'm not talking about small shop owners, I'm not talking about small business holders.
When it comes to inheritance tax, you are when it comes to
money while
inheritance
asleep
tax
than any of us could earn in the
You
life.
are talking about those people.
But again, he's not talking about them because they're not the top 4% of estates. They just aren't. The top rate of inheritance tax used to be 75% pre-Thatcher. Thank you for that factoid in chat, Ben. Again, we should go back to that. Because these people don't believe in merit. They don't believe in equal playing fields. They don't believe in equality of opportunity. They believe in generational wealth. They want to recreate feudalism. And they think that you should have a birthright to the incredible wealth of your parents based on dumb luck. Based entirely on dumb luck. That's what they believe. And she says that any society that tries to make it so that asset wealth is equitably distributed, they don't work very well. That was literally the golden age of capitalism in Britain in the post-war period. That was quite literally the society we had at its best in the post-war period, where we taxed the highest earners and the highest inheritance and much higher rates than we do now. We had a much more equal society, one of the most equal societies in Europe in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and that was the golden age of capitalism. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.